So yeah, hi guys.
Okay.
And yeah, I'd like to make this fairly interactive if people want to jump in. I'm not an expert. I'll just caveat the whole thing first. I'm not an expert on some of the aspects of this, but I'm happy to facilitate and present the presentation. And if anybody wants any further information on it, they can reach out to me separately. I'm happy for whoever's got my details. Jason's got my details to share them around. So I'm happy to take questions during the presentation and afterwards if I can't answer them at the time. So yeah. Good morning, everybody. Good to see you all. My name's Josh Woods. I'm the account manager for North America West as we divide up the Americas here at LR. So I look after clients from San Diego all the way up to Alaska and out to Calgary. So that's my patch, but a lot of the work is focused in and around Vancouver. Yeah, so my background is a mechanical engineer and marine surveyor after that, all with Lloyd Register. And I'm presenting to you today on net zero transition pathways. So how is the marine industry going to get to zero and what fuels are going to get us there? So yeah, this is the agenda. It's all about decarbonisation and how is LR playing its part. And we're also looking at the fuels and the three different ways we're analysing fuels and looking at whether they're going to be the fuel of the future and whether they're ready now or whether they're ready in 10 years or they're ready in 30 years and what different things are influencing whether they're going to be ready. So you can see the investment readiness, technology readiness, and the community readiness, and they'll be mentioned a few times during this presentation. So yeah, just a brief start off. Why do we need to decarbonise? I think it's reasonably obvious, and you can see here there's some big wigs here talking about different reasons to do it and why we need to start now and what our goals are. So yeah, we've got the Secretary General of the IMO, we've got Ursula von der Leyen from the EU, and so there's lots of reasons why we need to decarbonise, and there's lots of important people talking about it, and I think we're seeing a bit more action now. Maybe 5 years ago we weren't, but we are now. And why is zero carbon fuels needed for full decarbonisation? So we've got the aim as the marine industry to achieve absolute reduction in GHGs by at least 50% in 2050. And as you can see on this graph on the right hand side here, if we continue as we are now, the trajectory is just going to go up, and we're just going to use more tons of CO2, and more is going to be expelled into the atmosphere, and obviously all the issues that come with it. I'm not going to go into those issues, but there are lots of issues with that. And you can see a couple of different trajectories here on what we can do. So if we're 100%, drop down here. If we're 50%, we drop down here. So yeah, and shipping, this is quite an interesting one, that shipping was, I think it's 2.3% of global CO2, which is quite a lot, but this actually increases by 10% if we don't do anything about that. And 10% of the global CO2 emissions is a huge amount, and shipping is already under a lot of pressure to decarbonize. And imagine if we quadrupled that, the amount of global CO2 we were emitting would be under even more pressure. And what do we mean by zero carbon fuels? So there's a lot of talk in the industry about methanol, hydrogen. You can see along here, electricity, diesel, LNG, and you can see here there's lots of different types of those fuels. And as you can see on the left here, to produce these zero carbon energy sources, so your bio LNG, your e-ammonia, your natural gas hydrogen, you need an energy source to produce those fuels. And as you can see here, renewable electricity and e-methanol, hydrogen, e-ammonia, they're zero carbon. If you're producing electricity from renewable sources and then you're producing those fuels from those renewable electricity sources, you've got a zero carbon energy fuel source. And you can actually, as you can see here, you can actually produce hydrogen and ammonia with and make it zero carbon by having carbon capture as well. But obviously there's a lot of complication and a lot of expense involved in that. So there are various ways we can make and future energy sources zero carbon. And then we've got to look at it from I think the marine industry and the IMO and the different regulatory bodies are very good at looking from a tank to weight perspective in terms of energy emissions. However, I believe, and LR, we believe, we need to look at it from a more holistic point of view. So it's a well to wake perspective, because if we don't look at it from a well to wake perspective, we can reduce all the carbon that's produced on board, but where does that fuel come from? And it's those sorts of questions we also need to be asking ourselves. And it might not necessarily be regulated by the IMO, but as a shipping industry, we need to be looking at that well to wake perspective on energy production. And as you can see here, there are plenty of resources to be able to produce those fuels, and then we've got those fuels quite often have to be processed, and then they have to be bunkered, and then they have to be stored, and then obviously you then get the proportion, which is what everybody thinks about. We all think about what's coming out the funnel, but actually we've got these 4 stages here that we need to look at when we're decarbonising. So this is our LR decarbonisation hub and getting to zero model. And actually, I'll just take a step back here a minute. And I know I mentioned the decarbonisation hub. It's a particular department within LR. It's not who I work for, but it's our focal point within the business for all decarbonisation projects and initiatives. It's run out of the UK in Southampton. If anybody wants to hear more about it, please get in touch with me. I can put you in touch with the guys there. And there, I think we're up to about 10 people now within that hub who are coordinating all our worldwide projects on how to decarbonise the shipping industry and how we can help our clients. And the way we're doing that is projects come into us all the time, and we're looking at them from our getting to zero model, and we're using a marine solution readiness level. So that combines the technology readiness level, the community readiness level, and investment readiness level to give us a marine solution readiness level. And that is how we judge when a fuel is going to be available and ready to use in the marine industry. And when it's basically looking at, is it suitable for use now? Can we use it now? Is the technology ready for it now? Is the community ready for it? And is anybody going to, more importantly, is anybody going to pay the money to put that fuel on the ship now? Or is it going to be 10 years, or is it going to be 20? So how do we play our part? So within LR, we're developing all the time. We're developing new rules and knowledge, employing more SMEs. We're producing papers, as you can see here, low carbon pathways 2050, zero emission vessels 2030, and we're doing all these studies to work on how we can help our clients and help the industry, more importantly, decarbonize. And I don't know if anybody saw, but LR recently we sold our business assurance business, and we're now just wholly focused on marine clients and the marine industry. And so we don't have an energy business anymore. We don't have a business assurance business anymore. We're just solely focused on marine. And from my perspective, that's already making a difference. We're already being able to focus more on our clients and be their trusted advisor. And it's a complicated issue, right? There's lots going on, and a lot of ship owners are just waiting to see what happens. And there's a reluctance to be a first mover. So at LR, that's why we've got the decarbonisation hub. That's why we're doing all these initiatives. We're publishing all this material just to try and help the industry and guide the industry. But we don't necessarily want to be the people to make the decision, but we want to help our clients make an informed decision. So, and this is some of the platform. I'm not going to touch on this, but these are some of the clients we're working for. With the collaborative platforms, and there's industry associations, as you can see at the bottom here. So just some of the different people we're getting involved in through the decarbonisation hub. And this is just a picture essentially of how the model works. And I'm not going to go into in too much detail, but you can sort of see how we build partnerships, and we find evidence, and we analyze the projects and look at them from a technology point of view, safety, sustainability, investment, and policy. And then that's all working together to provide and help provide the marine industry with zero emission vessels by 2030. And you can see our vision on the top left-hand corner there. And that's how, and this is we believe it's going to be a circular process, everybody working together to get to that point. So now we're moving on to the transition pathways. So this is how the particular fuels are going to help us get to that goal, which is the zero emission vessels. And you can see here across the top, we've got the timeline, and today we've got fuel oil on board. We've got fuel oil with efficiency and technology on board, and we've got fuel oil blended with bio, and then we've got an LNG, and those are the 4 ways that vessels are pretty much the 4 ways vessels are functioning at the moment. And you can see here, these are if the transition was based on hydrogen. So if everybody decided today that every vessel is going to be using hydrogen in 10 years time, by 2050, 2030, 2035, this is what the transition would look like. So you would go for fuel oil, you go with blue hydrogen, dual fuel, you go, if you've got fuel oil with energy efficient technologies on board, you would make it super efficient with fuel oil up until 2030, and 100% bio, LNG blended with H2. And then, as you can see here, that's the diversification and hybridization for the next 10 years. And then you're moving into your blue, your green, blue and green, and then your green hydrogen. I'm going to confess here, I'm not an expert on all the difference between blue, green, bio, hydrogen, things like that. But it's all to do with how they're produced. So I believe blue hydrogen is not zero carbon because it's produced using non-renewable sources, but then as you move to green hydrogen, then that is produced from completely renewable sources on hydrogen. Personally, I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think there's going to be one fuel fits all, but and this is some of the key features of hydrogen. I'm not going to go through this in any detail because it's very easy to look up and you don't need me to tell you. But there's distribution challenges, and it's very hard to store because it's very small molecules and it disappears really quickly. So it's there are quite a few issues with it, but it does have a lot of potential as well. So yeah, and these are just some of and I can share this presentation afterwards. So if you want to look at it in more detail, you can go through this slide at your leisure. And here are just a few of the projects we've been working on with hydrogen. Here in Vancouver, actually, we're working with Capilano Maritime to produce a hydrogen-powered harbour cruise vessel. It's going to be the first one designed in Canada. And we're going through all the different processes at the moment. We're doing some risk-based rules analysis. We're doing some hazards. We've got an FMEA coming up, and then we're going to do an improvement principle. So there's lots going on in the hydrogen space, and I know big oil majors such as Shell all their eggs are in the hydrogen behind it. I think it's definitely got a future, and they believe Shell believe LNG is a transition fuel, and they don't think ammonia is the way forward. I mean, you've got to take it with a pinch of salt because Shell don't produce ammonia, but they do produce hydrogen. So there's lots of forces at play here, but definitely some big industry powers behind hydrogen as a future fuel, and we're here to help them through these test beds and pilots that I've just described. And now we go on to ammonia, and this is how we believe ammonia would work over the next 30 years, and if the industry adopted ammonia. And as you can see, it's a very similar transition. So you sort of got your diversification, hybridization, so you got dual fuel, efficient ships, and LNG, and then you've got your ammonia that's produced through different sources. So you've got ammonia produced through using fossil fuels, and you've got ammonia produced through more renewable energy. So you have your green or ammonia. And ammonia, and yeah, so I'm not going to dwell on this slide because it's very similar to the hydrogen transition pathway. And ammonia also, and the key ammonia are here. Ammonia also has its own problems. It's very toxic, and so there's issues with machinery space having ammonia in it, and already solved. It's just the expense and finding some to fund fund those. As such, we're already there, and there's plenty of ships carrying ammonia around the world at the moment. So yeah, and yeah, you can look at this slide in more detail after the presentation. And yeah, we're working quite closely with, and there's a Castor initiative down there on the bottom left-hand corner. And what we did, which is fairly unique, is we approached working with an agricultural company that produces ammonia, because the main use of ammonia at the moment in the world is for, I don't know whether it's pesticides, but it's used in agriculture. And it's not used as a fuel at all. So we're working with one of these companies that produce ammonia, and we're pulling them into doing an AIP with shipyards out in Korea, as you can see over here on the right hand side, with Hyundai Mipo shipyard, and we're working with them. We're bringing all joint industry partners. So we've got the engine manufacturers, the shipyard, the ship owner, and the ammonia producers, and working together to try and visualize and provide an approval in principle for an ammonia powered ship. Yeah, has anybody got any questions as I go through, or are you happy for me to keep going?
A silence, Josh. So I would keep going.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Well, silence is. I'll take that as you're all absorbed in my presentation, so we'll keep going. Yeah. And yeah. So this is the transition based on methanol. As you can see, it's fairly similar to the ammonia and hydrogen transition. And yeah, you've basically got the next 10 years of hybridization, and then you've got when the actual fuel takes off and is being installed on the vessels, and various different ways of producing methanol, and you go from there. And I suppose the interesting thing here is that, and if you're a ship owner or you guys are surveyors, you're on board vessels and you're talking to people in the industry, and the thing that interests me is we're now 2022. If you're looking at this model from 2030 to 2035, we're predicting that if we want to get to those targets that the IMO set down, vessels need to be trading on pure bio or blue methanol here, for instance, for methanol. And that means that the ships that are going to be trading, they're either already trading out there now or they're being built now. And how are we going to, I think the challenge, and I don't have any answers for this challenge, is that how are we going to get those vessels to be built or converted to carry these fuels, and what we can do about the rest of the fleet that the ship owners don't want to spend the money to change or convert the vessels. So it's going to be an interesting challenge, and I think at the end of this decade there's going to be it's going to have to be a lot of change for us to be able to hit these targets. And so yeah, I think that's probably because this slide is just showing very similar to the previous slides, but the interesting bit is how are the ship owners, how the operators, how are the classification societies going to work together to get all these ships online and trading on these alternative fuels in the early 2030s. Yeah, and there's plenty of pilots we've been using with methanol as well, with various different industry bodies, ship owners. And yeah, I'm not going to transition pathways from what we are at the moment to what we're going to be in 2030, 2040. So now I'm going to talk a bit more about the overall readiness of these zero carbon fuels. So how ready are they? How quickly can we get them into the industry and onboard vessels? And this is something we've developed. It's called the Zero Carbon Fuel Monitor, and it's an interactive fuel monitor where you can play around with the dashboard, and you can look at the different technology readiness level, what the investment readiness level, and what the community readiness level is for that particular fuel. And this is an interactive, free-to-use tool that we've really use it to assess what level the fuels that you're looking at, or the fuels that your clients are looking at, or ship owners are looking at, and what stage it is at the moment, and what we think, and how we think it's going to be suitable in the future. So I'll just talk a little bit about the different ways we're assessing the fuels. And as you can see, like the levelized cost of production. So the investment readiness is, we're looking at, it's essentially, it's just going to boil down to the cost of these fuels and how much it costs to produce and how much it's going to cost our clients in the future to use those fuels. And is the cost, to simplify it, is the cost prohibitive for anybody to invest in those fuels at the moment? And how long is it going to be until the price comes down of those fuels for it to be suitable to be used? Because at the end of the day, you guys all know that we, as a shipping industry, have historically just used what's the bottom of the barrel, heavy fuel oil. It's the cheapest fuel that nobody else wants to use, and that's what's been fueling the ships going around in the world for the last 50 years at least. So for us to change from that inexpensive bottom of the barrel fuel to something that's a lot more expensive, something's going to have to change, and somebody's going to have to pay the bill. And you can see here total cost of operation of the different zero emission vessels and the different fuels that will be on those zero emission vessels as you go through. So you can see at the bottom here, it's a timeline, and you can see the cost of those vessels and the cost to operate those vessels and how it will decrease over time or increase depending on what the as you can see here, you've got your biofuels at the beginning, and they're cheap at the moment, but we predict they'll probably go up as we go over the next 30 years. And your, say, like your e-diesel or your e-ammonia, which is the green one, is decreasing as we go over time. Yeah, and you can see on the left here, there's a summary of that. And this is just a summary of how much the fuel-related voyage costs are at the moment. Sorry, I've got this recurring error on my Outlook. Yeah, and this is actually quite an interesting slide. This is talking about a bit about the energy density of the zero carbon fuels. So, and there's actually another slide coming up that's even more informative than this one. But it's just the impact of on the carrying capacity of a vessel. So LNG, I think LNG maybe it's more, we need to carry more of it than fuel oil, to quite a bit more than fuel oil for the equivalent amount of distance traveled, and having to carry more volume of the fuel impacts on the amount of cargo that the vessel can carry, and ultimately that hits ship owner or ship operator's bottom line, depending on who's paying the bills. Yeah, and this is also quite interesting and sort of touching on similar points to the slide before, but that was talking about impact on the amount of cargo that a vessel can carry, but this is the energy equivalent. So you can see here that HFO and MGO, they've sort of got similar mass and volume, but here you've got LNG. It's smaller mass, so it's a bit lighter than HFO, but it takes up twice the volume of HFO. So the same equivalent ship, you're going to have twice the amount of room taken up by your fuel tanks as you were for a traditional HFO carrying ship. And then, as you can see here, you can go from left to right, and you can see methanol, ammonia, hydrogen kept at various different pressures and at various different temperatures. And as you can see here on the far right, hydrogen at 350 bar it's taking up a huge volume, but doesn't weigh very much, but it's taking up a massive volume. So a lot of ship owners I know are looking at innovative ways to put hydrogen on board. So you can carry them quite high up in the ship. You can carry them on deck. You can have huge tanks on deck, and it won't impact your stability that much because it's very low mass, but it takes up a huge amount of room. So there's a lot of ways you can play with this table, but it just depends what your ship owner wants, or whoever's going to build the ship wants. And here you can see the technology readiness level of the various fuels. So as you can see here at the top, like bio LNG, e-LNG, it's pretty much there. It's on the same as low sulfur heavy fuel oil at the bottom. It's ready to go. There's vessels trading on it all at the moment, and it's there and ready for us to put on board, and vessels are trading at the moment. And you can see here hydrogen and the natural gas hydrogen with carbon capture, hydrogen. There's still a lot of work to do for us to be able to, the technology to be ready to be on board in the next 2 to 3 years. And as you can see here, the various different fuels are at different levels of technology readiness. And then the community readiness, which is also a huge thing that we need to take into account. You've got this looks at it from a holistic point of view. And I think this table is probably better for you to study afterwards, but essentially it's looking at the different fuels and where you're pushing the problem, whether you're pushing it upstream to or downstream to the producers. So it's where that carbon is going to be and where you need to take it out. Great. So just the key messages of how LR are looking at fuels and future fuels. And yeah, we're looking at as I've said several times in the presentation, we're looking at it from an investment, a technology, and a community readiness level. And we believe that those three, you have to have all three for a future fuel. You have to assess a future fuel against all three standards, because if one is not working, the fuel won't be viable. And as you can see here, for the investment readiness level, the primary driver of the fuel is the fuel price. So it's an operational issue, not a capital expenditure issue. Like, it is more expensive to build these ships of future fuels, but it's not. We're talking in the region of, I think it's around 20% more expensive to build a ship with these future fuels. But your impact for your interested parties is over the lifetime of that ship, and how much your OPEX is going to be impacted by having to buy this future fuel, and the market forces that are at play. And I think ultimately we can talk about the future fuels quite extensively, but I believe that we're actually just going to become not a victim, but we're going to be forced to use whatever fuel the market pushes onto us. And because ultimately we've used heavy fuel oil because nobody wants it for the last 50 years, and not because nobody wants it, but it's the cheapest fuel, so obviously we're going to use it. And I think it's going to be a market-driven technology and market-driven fuel that we're going to use, not necessarily. I don't think the marine industry is necessarily going to choose it. Then you've got technology readiness level, which discussed on how the technology for that fuel is developed and how mature it is. And the first line here is safety challenges. Can they be addressed? And is the fuel ready from a technology and an engineering point of view to be able to put on board the vessels? And then the community readiness level, are there policies in place to be able to use this fuel? So I didn't talk about it much today, but nuclear is a good example. Like, the investment and the technology is there. We've got at least 40 vessels in the water using nuclear fuel at the moment worldwide. I think it's actually more than that. And it's not too bad. I don't think it's too expensive from an OPEX point of view. Well, it's cheap from an OPEX point of view, because depending on the technology, if you use a modern salt reactor, you can put it on board of the vessel and you don't have to refuel it for 20 years. So your OPEX is zero. There's a fair CapEx issue, but your OPEX is zero. But it tends, if you try to put a nuclear ship in Vancouver, I think the local residents would have an issue with it. And that is the biggest problem with nuclear, is the policy and the community and the issues surrounding trying to trade with vessels with nuclear fuel on and trading them to different ports. So yeah, they're the three key messages and the three key takeaways I'd like to hope you'll remember from this discussion, is that you've got to have these three. You've got to assess a fuel from these three different perspectives for it to be viable, for us to get to those IMO goals. And yeah, this is just a bit of an example of ammonia and how it works. I probably won't go through this from. I don't think it's any worth going through it because it's quite complicated, but you can study it in your leisure after today. Great. Well, that's me. I think I've about 20 minutes there. So yeah, very happy to take some questions and discussion points, or we can move on. Up to you guys.
Many thanks, Josh. Any questions for Josh?
Josh,
question.
oh, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. Hi, Josh. How you doing?
Yeah, good, Jason. Yeah, good to hear from you.
It's a quick one on the fuels. Are you sort of seeing a drive by the fuel producers that are sort of pointing in a specific direction of like more, they're concentrating more on hydrogen or ammonia or methanol?
Yeah, so it's a good question. I suppose the two examples I've got, I touched on the presentation. Ammonia is, as I said, it's not being produced by anybody that's in any way linked to the marine industry at the moment. So there is no, I don't think there's no supply chain, there's no desire really from the current producers to supply the marine industry. It might be that that changes in the future, but they're not going to be driving this agenda. They'll obviously sell to the marine industry if there's a market there, and if the marine industry adopts ammonia, there's going to be a huge demand for it. So they'll ramp up production. They'll be keen to sell. But it's actually, and also there's the issue of the infrastructure between the plants that are producing ammonia at the moment and getting them on board the vessels. But from the fuel producers, from a ammonia standpoint, there's no real push from them apart from them being able to see a future opportunity to sell more ammonia to marine clients as opposed to just selling them to agriculture clients at the moment. Hydrogen's an interesting one, and the best I used to look at Shell was one of my accounts in London, so I talk to them all the time, and it's not a secret that they are pushing the hydrogen agenda hard, and they are not interested in having any ammonia conversations whatsoever. And I mean, everybody's got their own point of view, but like for Shell, hydrogen is the future. They can't see the advantages of hydrogen over ammonia are huge, and that's their point of view. There's people that argue for and against that point of view, but that's Shell, and they are pushing that agenda hard, and they will continue to push that because they see the future fuel that's going to fuel. I don't know about aviation, but certainly ships, and certainly what's going to be traded. The hydrocarbon that's going to be traded, well, it's not hydrocarbon, but is hydrogen. Sorry. So they are pushing that agenda, and they will continue to push it. So I sometimes think these big players, the oil majors, who they can see the writing on the wall for oil. They know that it's not gonna. I mean, they're all buying left, right, and centre. They're buying renewable firms, renewable energy producers, and they can see the writing on the wall of oil not being the fuel in 20 years' time. So I always think that's probably a good indicator to see where things are going to go, because they have huge influence. So yeah, that was a long-winded way of saying yes. The fuel producers do have a huge influence, and I believe if you want to watch a bellwether, you need to watch these guys on where it's going to go. It's not going to be LL that it's influencing it. We're just there to facilitate the safe use of these fuels on board. That is our key prerogative, really.
Yeah. Right on. Excellent.
We have another hand raised.
Oh,
there.
yeah. Is that Mr. Beadle?
It's Mr. Beadle. Need to unmute your microphone.
Oh, yeah.
Here we go. How's that?
Yeah,
That's
great.
good.
Yeah.
Thank you. When I think of hydrogen, as the image that flashes in my mind is the Hindenburg, and you just spoke to it a moment ago. The safety concerns are going to be pretty significant. Must be a huge amount of time and therefore money going into those thoughts and discussions. I guess that's the question. Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. I think, and that's where I'll emphasize that's what we're here to do. We're not going to, as LR, we're not going to be influencing. We don't want to influence what the next fuel is going to be. We can't. It's going to be a market-driven force. We're not there to choose, and we're also not there to take sides. We're not in the ammonia. And I know there's been a bit of talk in the industry of some of the class societies taking one side or the other on the future fuel debate, and that is, from our perspective, I can't speak of the other class societies, but from our perspective, that's not what we won't ever do that, because we're here to facilitate the safe use of the fuels on board. And yeah, from a hydrogen perspective, it's a huge issue, the safety of those fuels. I think the advantage of it, and I touched on, and not to go into details, but the advantage of using hydrogen is how light it is, and actually you can have it high up on deck, easily ventable out into the atmosphere, and because it's so light, it will go straight up into the atmosphere. I'm not a chemist, I'm not an expert on hydrogen, but there are some advantages. You can see some advantages of using hydrogen from a safety perspective on being able to get it up high, away from engine rooms, away from the rest of the crew, and having it easily ventable. But these are all things we're developing. I discussed earlier about it's a hydrogen fuel vessel project we're working on with Capilano. It's actually a fuel cell, so it's not a traditional combustion engine. It's a fuel cell powered by hydrogen, and we actually don't have a mature rule set for hydrogen powered ships. But what we are doing extensively and in many different projects is we're assessing them from a risk-based rules perspective. So we're doing those HAZOPs at the beginning, then we're doing a hazard, then we're doing an FMEA on those fuels, and we're getting that. We're developing our expertise on the fuels and how we make them safe on board. And it's from a risk perspective. And I can see within the next 5 years, we will have prescriptive rule sets that describe exactly how you should use this fuel safely. But at the moment, we don't have them. And we're approaching it from a risk-based rules perspective to ensure they're safe on board. So yeah, it's the safety is the key, one of the key points actually, because heavy fuel oil is pretty safe really. It just sits there. It's like very low flash point in a lot of ways. So yeah, it's pretty safe fuel compared to, like, say, ammonia, which is fairly deadly. So yeah.
Great, thank you.
Sarah, got your hand up?
Yeah, do you see one fuel in particular becoming the dominant fuel, or do you think we're going to be dealing ultimately in the end with multiple fuels? Because it starts to get very complicated, particularly when you're dealing, say, from a surveyor's perspective of rules and regulations governing the use of these fuels.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think there will become one dominant fuel, just because I can't see the infrastructure being developed for different fuels. And although we are doing a bit of, and I wouldn't say that's an LR point of view. I think it's probably a bit more of a personal point of view. But something we are in contrast to that opinion that I've just provided, we are doing quite a lot of work at the moment on green pathways, and that is looking more at a horses for courses model, on taking particular trade routes and saying, look, it makes sense to have ships fueled in X place and delivering X cargo, the cargo to Y, and it's because we can produce, I'm making this up, but you can produce renewable ammonia in that specific place, and you can offload the, oh no. Anyway, it's basically just having a horses for courses where you can match a fuel and a destination and a cargo all together, and developing a ship for that trade. At which point you could sort of see how you would have multiple fuels being used around the world, because you can use those unique aspects of those different places that you're trading to provide an efficient, easy to use fuel that's cost effective. But I personally think it's going to be, I think there'll just be one fuel, and we'll just develop infrastructure that's the same all over the world to use that fuel. But I think we'll see a lot of it, and we're already seeing it. We'll see a lot of LNG power. I was actually talking to a ship owner the other day, and he was saying that they think they've ordered their last, never say never, but they've ordered their last they've ordered their last fuel oil ship, traditionally fueled ship, and everything else they'll order will be some form of hybridization, dual fuel with electrification, etc. But they've ordered, yeah. So yeah, it's an interesting world, and I didn't think I would hear that quickly, but I did, which was pretty interesting.
Ed, did you have a question?
Actually, I did, but I think we've kind of covered it. But I just was going to use an example here on the Great Lakes, as where, the last 15 to 20 years, our domestic fleet operators have renewed their fleets, and they've gone to modern, more modern tier 3, tier 4 engines.
Yeah.
2 companies, they've introduced biodiesel that they're using, and other companies in the LNG. Looking at the community-based readiness, I haven't really got involved too much with the domestic fleet fueling operations, but it's just interesting how the companies come to different approaches between biofuel and the LNG approach. Because with the biofuel, the one domestic carrier, they have a supplier in Sarnia, Ontario, that is a single source. I think they are the only supplier of biodiesel on the Great Lakes at the moment. But and it goes back to Sarah's question, will there be a predominant fuel? Interestingly, though, like when I try to create my own analysis, the domestic, more domestic ship versus the one that is on LNG it could be flagged in and out of the Great Lakes. So it was just a matter of, my question was about community readiness in terms of supply and infrastructure. But I think your point is well noted, where probably futuristically the ships will be designed on trade and fuel, I think, moving forward, because I think the cost and the capacity is just going to dictate that, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think horses for courses designed on a trade. I think it could be quite an effective way of dealing with it, a lot of the issues. But it comes down to cost as well. Are we willing to pay more to transport our goods around the world as well? Because inevitably, until it all settles down, it's going to take a long time to settle down. It's going to cost more to transport goods around the world, because to get to the lofty goals that we've set, which is good from my perspective, we have to set these goals if we're serious about decarbonisation. It's just going to cost more. It's 20% more for a new vessel I think maybe it's down to 10% now, but an LNG fuel vessel is like between 10 and 20% more expensive. And that an LNG is well-developed technology that is proven to work. And I mean, ammonia, hydrogen, there's barely any vessels trading on those fuels. So yeah. I think methanol's also viable. That needs the least amount of modifications and special technology on it. So I think it's a decent option.
Yeah, and I taking it a little further, and it's in your model. I really appreciate your presentation; is fantastic, and I like the linkages. I will go back to it just to absorb a little more of it. But even between the types of ships, like cruise ships, will LNG effective for it, or will there be, maybe ammonia? But I know it's, when you start breaking down the types, I think it's going to be interesting.
For sure. Yeah, I've just posted the link to the zero carbon fuel monitor that was just referenced in the presentation, and you can go in there. It's really interactive. You can like play around with the dials, you can pick different fuels, you can it's a really interesting model to have a play around with. So Cheers,
well, thanks. I really appreciated, very informative, and and a growing topic. As Mike was talking earlier about training, the change in the decarbonization it happens every day, and so it's quite a lot to learn yet.
Oh yeah,
so,
for sure.
Yeah.
And just to remind you, if you go into your chat box, you'll be able to pick up that link that Josh has posted. That's in the chat box.
Perfect. Thanks.
I'm going to just pause the recording now.